Growing up under the shadow of a real estate tycoon means learning early that love is just another contract. My father controlled every luxury resort along the Atlantic coastline, treating his children like pieces on a corporate chessboard. The afternoon I married a man with grease-stained hands, my father stood up at our reception and cut me off in front of everyone. He promised I would inherit nothing, expecting me to beg for his approval. My husband just smiled, leaned into the microphone, and delivered a 4-word response that silenced the entire ballroom. Nobody in that room actually knew what my husband did for a living, or what I had been quietly engineering behind their backs. My family assumed they had broken me by taking away my trust fund and my last name. 6 months later, they would discover the truth at the grand opening of my father's billion-dollar crown jewel. It happened in front of 500 high society guests. At the exact moment his entire empire depended on the man he had publicly humiliated. That dinner began like every other forced family gathering, at a massive mahogany table overlooking the private harbor. My father loved to boast about owning the ocean, though he really only owned the view and the people trapped in his orbit. Without looking up from his meal, my father announced that he had scheduled a date for me with a wealthy hedge fund heir. He explained that the upcoming corporate merger was stalling, and having us seen together would secure the deal. I set my fork down, trying to keep my hands from shaking as resentment burned in my chest. Reaching into my purse, my fingers brushed against the worn brass calipers my grandfather had given me before he passed away. I looked my father dead in the eye and told him I was already seeing someone else seriously. The silence that followed was heavy and cold, causing my mother's fake smile to instantly freeze on her face. My father set his glass down, staring at me with the absolute detachment he usually reserved for a bad property investment. He told me that in our circle, marriage was a strategic merger, and that sentimentality was a luxury for people who could not afford power. I kept my mouth shut, refusing to give him my boyfriend's name or explain how little he fit into this toxic world. I only smiled and let the silence sit there, knowing that some answers are better delivered later. My father had me investigated immediately, which was his standard procedure for anyone who dared to defy his wishes. A few days later, I was summoned to his penthouse office, where the massive glass windows were designed to make visitors feel completely insignificant. A thin manila folder sat on his desk, containing everything his private detectives could dig up on my life. He opened it and read the name Julian Vance aloud, his voice dripping with disgust as he noted his lack of assets. He closed the file and asked if I was truly throwing away a fortune for a basic aviation mechanic. I told him Julian was a decent, honest man who actually cared about people rather than profit margins. My father laughed, walking over to the window with his hands behind his back as he delivered his final ultimatum. He told me that our family did not associate with laborers, and that good men were simply hired by people who actually built legacies. I had paid for my own engineering degree myself, working nights while my sister was handed a life of luxury. After they cut my credit cards, Julian and I moved into a small house near a regional airfield. I noticed he took late corporate calls on the porch, but I didn't press for details. We had promised to let our truths surface naturally, completely unaware that his private record was wiped to protect a massive secret. We arrived at our wedding to find the entire asphalt lot jammed with luxury vehicles that belonged in a high society magazine. My father had taken over the event, inviting 200 of his wealthiest business associates to watch my public demotion. He had even installed a massive wedding seating chart on a wooden easel right beside the main entrance. When I traced the layout to find my husband's assignment, the cruel nature of the setup became instantly clear. He had banished Julian to the absolute back of the room, right beneath an emergency exit sign. The typed card above his chair didn't even use his name, simply labeling him as an uninvited guest. During the toast, my father announced to the crowd that I was officially disowned for placing a grease stain on our reputation. Julian slowly stood up, looked my father dead in the eye, and calmly said, "We don't need it." The resort's upcoming launch depended entirely on a private jet contract with the massive Titan Aviation Group. My father had been aggressively courting Titan's reclusive chairman for nearly 2 years, desperate to close the massive deal. At the grand opening, 500 wealthy guests filled the overwater glass pavilion, waiting for the mysterious billionaire to appear. The master of ceremonies announced the chairman, the screens flashed, and the room cut to total silence. Julian released my hand, gave me a brief, private look, and walked directly up the steps onto the main stage. I watched my father's face completely drain of color, the champagne glass slipping from his fingers as he froze. 500 people stood up to applaud the invisible titan who had finally stepped into the public light. The laborer he had discarded was revealed as the most powerful executive holding his future in his hands. My father rushed the stage, extending his hand and claiming he always knew I had impeccable taste. Julian refused to take the extended hand and stated clearly that he had personally declined the proposal months ago. He explained that his company did not partner with executives who treated their own children like corporate write-offs. Without that aviation partnership, my father had $1 billion building with absolutely no private fleet. I reached into my bag, pulled out my grandfather's brass calipers, and held them up under the stage lights. I reminded him that these belonged to his own father, the mechanic who had actually started our family fortune. I informed him that I was never going to inherit his empire because I was too busy building my own. I added that the very pavilion he was standing in couldn't legally operate without my engineering stamp. The flagship resort opened months late without the private jet service, causing his wealthy clientele to permanently find other destinations. My father recently came to our porch alone, looking incredibly small without his corporate entourage as he offered an apology. I told him real structural repairs take time, leaving the door slightly ajar but stripping him of his conditional leverage. True worth is always what you manage to build with your own two hands. Today, my grandfather's calipers hang proudly above my workshop bench, catching the final rays of the evening sun. Inheritance is simply what someone hands you, but true worth is what you manage to build with your own two hands. If you found inspiration in my journey of breaking free from a toxic family to build my own destiny, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to support more true stories like mine. I can hear a jet engine spooling up across the water right now. Its familiar sound meaning my husband is finally coming home, and no one can ever disown what we built together.